Hey everybody, it's Chris with One Heart, One Way, and we are getting ready to start our study of Isaiah Part 2. So I have a little bit of introductory information for those of you online and for those of you that are my new students. Maybe you've already done the homework and you just want to check in and see how you did, and maybe you're not started and you're catching this video in time to see what else you can do. So remember, one of the main things to do is to pray before you start each lesson. So I did this once, and luckily for you, there were some glitches with a monitor that I'm using now. And so I'm redoing it. And I say lucky for you because it was way longer than would have liked it. So I'm hoping just to give you the helpful information you need and not too much of anything else. So let me jump right in. First of all, most of you probably already have the book. If you don't, I'm going to show you just a glimpse of what they look like. Also because it's got the link to order, although I don't think that will work for you. But I will list it in the comments below so that you can order this book. You can see that this is the NASB version. They have an ESV as well. You can study or read in any book of the Bible that you are used to, but for these purposes, that's the translation that they've written the studies in. In your own cross-referencing, you can use whatever translation you're used to. You'll want to use the observation worksheets, though, to keep that information there. Okay, so take a look at the book. You'll notice there's a glued casing. You're going to want to take that off to put it in a 3-ring binder. Some of us have gone along and we don't completely remove it. I just sort of take mine apart in sections, but that's completely up to you. As we're doing this video, if you're kind of working along with me, go ahead and do that. Pause the video whenever you need to as I get ready to jump to another step, because this isn't a question by question walkthrough. I just want to point out a few things that I know can cause problems when someone's first starting the homework. Okay, so if you look at the table of contents, you'll see it's a 9-week study. We're going to use that as our summer study and work through it and finish this year at the end of July. The appendix is going to be very important to you. Every week you will be grabbing the worksheets, which are the text of the chapters of Isaiah. That's where those are, and some extra handouts and charts live there as well. And so almost every week, no, probably every week, you'll be directed to go back to the appendix. So you might want to have a look at that now, because I think our next step is for me to have you get some pages out. But let's start actually with your page 1 before you go to the appendix. And I'm going to bring that up as a screen. You will want to read that. There's some great encouragement there, but I also want to show you the part that you will see every week on your homework. It will show you ahead of time what you're going to use. So you can see here the arrow is pointing at what this lesson incorporates. So you're studying chapters 40 and 41 of Isaiah. There's a review in Isaiah 1. So it's telling you that in the appendix, you're going to want chapter 1, chapter 40, and 41. There's a timeline, which has this historical chart name, and then Isaiah at a glance. These two things here, cross-references and word studies, are not pages in the appendix. They are just things that you will utilize here as we go along. So I think I have some page numbers here for you, but they may not line up with yours, but they will get you close to where you're headed. They might be a number off, but pages 99 to 108 are all of these chapters, 1, 40, and 41. You'll need all of them, and you'll want them today as we go through this video. 196 and 197 is the timeline. You'll want that today. I'm going to show you a few things on there. And pages 189 and 190, the Isaiah at a glance, which you will use for every lesson. So you'll want to move that along with you as you go. Okay. So once you have those out, we're going to move ahead to the first actual step in homework, which is page 2. So if you need to sort out all that paperwork, go ahead and pause for a minute and then open back up to page 2 of lesson 1, but have Isaiah chapter 1 ready because that's what we'll be using. Okay, hopefully you are all set to go. This is what the whole page looks like. We're going to focus in just on this introduction. Oops, not that one. Okay, that's what all 4 pages would look like. Here we go. This is the first instruction that I want to kind of go with you. This is what we call observation, and you will have this every step of your observation. So you're going to read, you're always going to read, and you're going to reread. You can see that you had 4 different words that it tells you you're going to mark with broad segments of color. And so that would include the Lord in yellow, Israel in blue, sin. There's some synonyms there for the word sin. And then you're also going to look at references to the future in pink. So they give you brown for sin, blue for Israel, and yellow for the Lord. So this color coding makes up a huge portion of our observation, what we do, which is called observing the text, which consists of marking it, making lists, and some things like that. So we will be doing that, and I'm going to share with you some tips on how you can move forward in that process here in just a second. So remember synonyms and remember pronouns. If you are ever confused about the pronouns, hold off on those until you can tell from the context which ones it means. So notice one of the things there, there's 4 words and you haven't even read the text yet. So one of the things that you want to do is not mark all 4 words when you go through, or later when your list is longer, you don't want to mark all of them on one read through. You want to read and reread the text. That's what's going to help you actually start keying into what's going on. It's one of the things we don't do when we're just reading a devotional or a small passage. We usually just read it, and that's fine, that's great. But if you're going to study, you need to see more. So don't do them all. One of the best things to focus in on a first read through is who. So since we're in the Bible, on my first read through, I always mark God or Jesus. And so you can get in that habit no matter what order words are on a list. You could just mark the people on the first read through, or in particular, any references to God. And so that's what I would do here, go through there. But I'm going to show you a screen of what it looks like to actually do this. And it would be verses 1 through 3, where I have marked the Lord and Israel, so that you can just get a quick idea of what we're talking about if you've never done this before. So when I'm finished, that's what verses 1 through 3 would look like. And I've just made squares of color. Later, in a more observation, when it's not review, I have some more specific things that I will do, but that's how you will get started. Okay, so on a first read through, go ahead now, take your observation worksheet and pause and mark the Lord for all 4 pages of Isaiah chapter 1. And you can mark Israel at the same time if you want to. But if you start to lose what the chapter's about, then slow down and just mark one at a time. If you can't answer a question about it when you're done, that probably means that you have tried to mark too many things at one time. All right, so go ahead and do that and then join me back to finish that off. Okay, so once you've done all of those, you can go through on a second read through and mark the other 2 words, which were sin and its synonyms. There's a couple they didn't show you there, which would be transgressions, iniquity. And then also mark future, references to the future in pink. So finish that, and then I'm going to show you just my final page, which will show you what it looks like after you have marked all four words. Okay, there's a reason why I want to show you this page. So this is one of the things I want to talk about. This can get busy. It doesn't bother me. It does bother some people. So you can work out systems where maybe in each sentence you only mark God once. Although here, if you notice, there's two different names of God. So it might be important to you to mark both. You can see here I have the blue for Israel. You can see down here, here's Zion, here's her, here's some synonyms, some places where this is I is God, my is God, myself. Then when you get down here, you can see I have transgressors and sinners. And then here under the U's, right here at the end, instead of blue, you can see that I have them brown. I had them blue at first because for Israel. And then I felt like they were maybe more specific to these here, that they referred back to transgressors and sinners. This is a place where you and I might disagree. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you noted them. So is it wrong to mark it blue? I would say no. Is it wrong to mark it brown? I would say no, because in each case, these transgressors and sinners in this chapter still refer to the people of Israel. In other chapters, they might not. So this is what I want you to see, that this is an example of this being tools that you use for you. And what I like to say is I want to teach you a method that gives you tools, not rules, so that you can make it your own. You have a toolbox, I have a toolbox. Our worksheets are going to look different, sometimes very different, and that's okay. So that is how, in this case, the chapters might look. Later, instead of blocks of color, you might be using symbols. As you can imagine, if you're doing a lot of marking, just blocks of color will probably not be enough. So that is what Isaiah 1 would look like when you finish what they've asked you for observation, which is just a deep look into the text to see what it says. The next step that you can see in your homework on page 2 is to answer a couple questions. So they're going to help you focus in on the who and the what, when, where, why, and how, which is what we're using to look at scripture, by asking you some questions. So the first question, or I think it's number 2 on the page, is look at where you marked Israel. What is their condition? Let me show you. This is what, in case you don't have a book in front of you yet, this is what the homework would look like. And it tells you here's where we did the marking. And now we're here at number 2. You're going to look at where you marked Israel. This is one of the places where when people ask me, what's the coloring for? I can say, well, there's a lot of reasons it's there. This is one of them. It's going to help you find the answers in the rest of your homework. If you have color-coded Israel in blue on your observation worksheets, it will be easy for you to find. You will just start back at the beginning of the text and look for the answers to the question and every question that we have that relates to those chapters. Now, for those of you who do want to read your passages in another version, let's say, for instance, the New King James, if you use that, but this is NASB, that's fine when you're reading. It will obviously help you more to do the homework if you use your observation worksheet version, because that's what you will have marked. So that would be one time when I would encourage you to use that worksheet. Okay, so let me give you a tip here on looking at where you marked Israel. What's their condition? Now you notice, I don't even remember how many verses we had, 30 to 40 verses in this chapter. If you look at all of those on your worksheet right now, you're going to see a lot of references to Israel. But if you look at the small amount of space they've given you for the answer, then you can tell this is probably not a place where we're looking for a verse by verse list. Sometimes they will, or sometimes you'll have a chart to fill in. In this case, it's review for a lot of us, and we just want a summary of what we learned. And for those of you that are new, this will give you the context for the whole rest of the book. We need to see what's going on with Israel. So go ahead now on your own, read back through, just start back at verse 1, look and see what you can find by looking at all of it. You might start to notice that in addition to the word Israel, that you probably have some other markings related to Israel. You'll probably have some of those other words marked, and that should help you get a picture for what is Israel like at this time, what's their condition. So go ahead and do that. Pause if you need to, and then look to see if you can answer that question. This one I'll sort of answer with you. So make sure you've tried it on your own first. Okay. If you were to look back at those places, you would probably notice that in verses 1 and 2, for instance, you'll see things that they have done. They have revolted against the Lord. Verse 3, you start to see some of those words you marked. They're sinful, weighed down with it. They're corrupted. They've abandoned God. They've despised him. They've turned away from him. Again, you don't need to write all of these. You want to get a general sense of the whole chapter and what their condition is. So that should tell you something. And then if you continue this particular chapter, you would continue to see sort of paragraph by paragraph description telling us what that is like, what it's done for them, what the fact that they've revolted against God and they're living in sin, what has that done? You see a poetic kind of description in verses 5 and 6. You see a description of their land in 7 through 9, then how God can deal with them in this condition, some instruction he gives them, and so forth. It really is a continuous description of this event. So for this particular case, you would want to come up with a summary for those things that you learn there. And you can tune in with us later after class discussion to see what you learned on that. If we continue in the homework, you can see that they're asking more questions about who. And notice they just want you to answer based on verses 1 and 2. Just as we were all trained in school to read our directions thoroughly, it really will help you if you do that in these cases, because sometimes you'll do more work than necessary if you don't look. This is a whole different answer if you use the whole chapter versus just looking at verses 1 and 2. Who's speaking? Who's he speaking for? Who's he speaking to? All of those are answered in just verses 1 and 2. So you're going to want to just answer the questions as they're written. That's in question number 3. My real focus I want to help you with is when we get to question 4. You should have grabbed one of the pages out of the book that you should have gotten again was that historical chart or timeline. And you want to have that in front of you as we get ready to talk about how to use it, because I think they're a little tricky. They're probably not really tricky. It's probably just me, but I like them better when they're in color in my Bible. I think that helps. So you can see this is what the chart actually looks like if I actually click share. Okay, and so there's a lot of information up here that we don't really need. This is the time it goes from the larger numbers to smaller because we're working towards the birth of Christ. So this is BC. So that's something to remember. So here's books of the Bible right through the center. Here's kings and prophets up here to different countries in the northern kingdom. Here's kings of Israel, the northern kingdom, and here's kings of Judah. This is who we're dealing with when we talk about the book of Isaiah, most specifically the kings of Judah and the prophet of Judah. You can see Isaiah right here. So what they want you to do is find those first 4 kings that you listed when you looked at when. The answer you got was during the reigns of 4 kings of Judah. Now they want you to see on your timeline where they are. Here's the first one going over all the way to the end of Hezekiah's reign right there. So you can see those. I think I have There I have it highlighted for you. And I think I put the years right here. That would line up with what you see right here. Okay, while you're here, if you want to, you could make a note on your paper of the reign of Isaiah because they're going to give you that question in just a minute. In fact, it's letter D, I think. If you want to write that in, you can see right here those years. The other thing you're going to want to see, and I may be jumping out of order in your homework, is this section right here on the timeline, which is the years of captivity. In between these two questions, they ask you to go look at two or three other things. That's what is next in your homework, and that would be called cross references. If you're new to this kind of Bible study, what you'll see is that we frequently go to other places in the Bible. That is what makes up a huge part of this kind of study. It's going to be where you spend a lot of your homework. Observation will be a big part of it, and then looking at cross references will be one of the other main parts. That's because we don't have a different source. We're using the Bible as our main source. And so we're using scripture to interpret scripture. We're going to use the Bible to teach us what the Bible says and what it means wherever we can. So you have a couple questions there. I guess it's letters B and C. Go ahead if you want to do the homework now as I'm going through it, pause, get those answers, and then we're going to go back to the timeline for the next one. So that's where you could catch up with us if you're just looking for the helpful hints. So for D and E, you're going to look back again at that timeline, and I've got it back up here for you. So here were the kings of Judah, right here. Here's the Babylonian captivity that they're asking you about. You can see it starts right here, Babylonian captivity, 3 stages. It's right here, and it ends over here when they return from when the first ones come back. Okay, I think I might have years for you for that as well. There's the total captivity, 605 BC to 536 BC. You can see this is a return of the remnant, so it's going to stop before then. Okay, so we're sort of giving you those answers, or you can be checking yourself at least by looking at those. Oh, and I didn't have that shared, so let me bring that back up. Okay, so you can see that right there. There's where the Babylonian captivity is from here to here, and then here's a return of the remnant. That's going to give you your end date on there. Okay, and again, that is where you also would have seen the answer that they're asking you for the next part, which is what is the time of the reign of Isaiah? Okay, so you want to go ahead and answer that as well. You want to find the answer for when Isaiah reigned. Then you want to look at that answer you just got about captivity. You want to compare the two as they're asking you. And then I want you to think about why they're asking you that. Why does that matter? Because there's probably a reason they gave you that. Make sure you stop and think about what that means. And then guess what? That's the end of day one. Those are all the pointers I have for you on that one. So I'm going to go ahead and move through day 2. A couple things I want to show you. Beginning of day 2, you'll see these are very much similar patterns. If you're starting a new chapter, you're going to do observation. In this study, they'll give you the keywords. In some studies, you'll be figuring that out on your own. Notice the list, if you're at the beginning of day 2, of the number of keywords for Isaiah chapter 40. Remember what I said before. Be prepared to read. You do not want to try and mark all of those at one time because pretty soon you won't be reading. You'll just be marking and not thinking. So again, the word God doesn't come till farther down in the list, but I would do that one first. I would do God. It notes a different name for him that you want to pay a special attention to there as creator. And then you could go back to the top. Jerusalem is the next one at the top. So you could do those together if you wanted to. But you can see that even if you do 2 or 3 words at a time, you're going to read through here 5 or 6 times. And that's okay. Not only is it okay, it's really good. One of those times, you should try and read it out loud. Maybe the first time through, maybe the last time, or maybe one in the middle. Hearing it out loud sometimes changes completely. For some reason with me, it helps me hear the different voices. When I lose track of who Isaiah is speaking about or to, sometimes reading it out loud brings the conversation aspect to it, and it helps me figure that out. So that's the main tip on your observation of chapter 40, is not to mark them all at one time. If you can't answer the question, what was that about? Or things aren't really striking you as you mark, then you're probably marking too many. Okay. What's the other thing I want to talk to you about in that day? Okay. Okay, you had instructions you can just follow for number 1 and 2. Number 3, word studies. Word studies are looking at words in the Bible in the original language. So in this case, Hebrew. We do that because they're very different kinds of language, English compared to Hebrew, in the way that they're written. One is Hebrew is way more descriptive than English. And so when those writers would speak the word back then, most of the time, or read it from a scroll later, that audience, those listeners, would hear something completely different than what we can sometimes get in our translation. And so by looking at the original language, sometimes you get a much more specific picture. And in some places in the Bible, this makes a huge difference to go. So they've given you the word glory in Isaiah 40, verse 5. Now, I have a video from a different study that will walk through this process using the concordance online on Bible Hub. I am going to link that in the comments, and I'll also link it directly at the end of this video and maybe up here on the screen itself if I can figure out how to do that. We'll see, but I will have it there for you. Now, it won't use this passage. It uses a different passage, but you follow the same steps and go through. You're going to start with your verse and then look up the words, and then you'll see how to walk through there. But if you've got a concordance or a Bible dictionary already at home, you can feel free to use that as well. I just find it to be much faster online these days. Okay, so that's word studies. Those will be, depends on the study. This one, they have another one, right, in week 1 of homework, and some semesters we don't do very many at all, although I tend to do many of them on my own. Okay. Go ahead, if you're doing this as I speak to you, go ahead and pause and finish your homework up to number 9. When you get to number 9, pause, and I just have a couple more tips about the last couple things on day 3 before we move forward. Number 9 is the encouragement to memorize a verse. The verse they have there is an amazing verse, and I highly recommend memorizing it. But what I wanted to say was that if a different verse has spoken to you very strongly, it might even be from a cross reference and not from Isaiah at all, feel free to memorize that verse instead or in addition. But you don't have to, these things are really personal, in my opinion, and it would make much more sense for you to memorize a verse that God really shared specifically with your heart. Again, the only other pointers I have for you on that is that memory verses take time. You have to do it over and over again. And so don't get frustrated if it's not coming right away, but you do have to work on it, but it's good work. And we can talk about tips for that sometime. Okay, number 10 has to deal with the at-a-glance worksheet, which you should have in your pile of papers if you removed all of them from the appendix that I talked about. This is where you're going to record a chapter theme. And one of the things I want to say here is don't get frustrated if that's difficult for you at first. This is another skill that takes a lot of practice for some of us, not for everyone, but for some people. Keep it simple. You're really just trying to answer the question, how in a summary or a couple bullet points or words can I write down what this was about so that it means something to me? It doesn't have to mean that much to anybody else, but it has to mean something to you. In this case, if you wanted some examples, chapters 1 through 39 have been completed on that chart because it's a review of what was done in Isaiah part 1. So really just try to answer the question, what was it about? Sometimes in the homework, I think this question comes a little early. For me, I don't usually try to answer this question until I have completed all of my observation and cross references and things for that chapter. Sometimes it's very clear, um, but it might take some time. Remember to keep it simple. Look at your keywords and look at each paragraph theme, which we'll talk about in just a minute. The only other thing I want to say about those right now is that you'll use those in every lesson. So just move those sheets forward with you, or I guess you could put them back in your appendix. Mine tend to travel and I lose them if I don't just put them right in the next lesson. Okay. Day 3, the final question is number 11, which is an application question where this is you talking with God. What has God shown you personally this lesson that he may not have shown to anybody else? And these questions, I think, become some of the questions that people skip when they're in a hurry. Please try not to do that. This, again, is your one-on-one time with God. And what's the point of having done all this work if you don't hear what he has for you specifically? And then, of course, if you are able to and can share that with us in class or with someone, then we all get that insight as well. And it may still be for you, about you, but usually we're going to learn something when you share it with us. And what's amazing is to hear the different insights from different people and see how God really does interact personally in his living word with people in different ways. So try and make sure you attempt those. Even if at that moment your answer is, I'm not sure, write that down. It's better than just leaving it. God starts to speak to you, I think, when you put pen on paper. He does for me, even if it's initially, I'm not sure what you're telling me. I feel like that's my invitation to him, and he seems to start to speak to me after that. Okay, that's the end of day 3. So all of this begins to be a reviewed pattern. Okay, days 4 and 5. Finally, hopefully I have not been talking as long as I did on the other video. Now you're going to observe chapter 41 just the same way. There aren't as many words, but again, remember not to mark them all at one time. There's another word study on the word, on a phrase that's one of my favorites in scripture. It's so key. There's an entire precept study on this phrase, and you learn so much from that one. Day 5 brings some summary work that can be something I'd like to show you, talk to you about very briefly here, but maybe more in another video. I probably have in a previous video. There's a day where they have you talk about what you learned from Isaiah chapter 41 in different chunks of scripture. And what those are the paragraph divisions. And I have made handouts on this in the past where if you have a page where you put all of your main information, including these, then it can be a really good summary of the chapter instead of the whole book, which can help you see. So when you're doing that, if they don't direct you to do it for a chapter, you could still do this on your own to ask what each little segment was about, which should help lead you to what the whole chapter is about. And that's something that maybe we'll talk about again, but that's what they're asking you there is what are those little sections of verses about? Okay, I think that that might be all I wanted to share with you. It looks like it is. So I hope that that's been helpful. Again, if you are at home, or again, if you're in class but didn't make it to the introductory class and just want to be sure that you're catching on to everything. So if you're watching, and you're one of my in-person or Zoom students, go ahead and text or call me or email me. If you have some questions, don't wait. Just go ahead and call and ask. If you're online and you really are following along and doing this, go ahead and in the comments do the same thing. I will get a notification if you write a question there, and I would love to answer that and interact with you a little bit. So thank you for watching. Watch for the links and the other helpful things that'll be here either at the end of the video, in the comments, or both. So enjoy that homework of Isaiah Part 2, Lesson 1. It's going to be so good. Thank you. Have a blessed week.